My fiancé cheated with my cousin while I paid for our wedding, so I walked away quietly, and what happened next shattered their lives completely. I'm a 29-year-old guy who grew up believing that loyalty, consistency, and financial stability were the pillars that held a relationship together, and for most of my life, that belief felt like the only thing I could rely on because everything else around me always felt unpredictable. I met Sienna during a time when I was emotionally drained, juggling work stress and family responsibilities, and the way she smiled at me that first night made something inside me loosen, as if I could finally breathe after years of holding everything together. She had this warmth, this ambition, this unwavering confidence that made me feel like I'd found someone who understood the life I was building. I remember her saying, "You deserve someone who sees your effort," and hearing that from someone who looked at me like I wasn't just a placeholder made me believe I'd finally found the person meant for me. So when we moved in together and our relationship accelerated, I didn't question it because taking on most of the financial weight simply felt natural since I earned more and wanted us to be secure. Her parents would tell me things like, "You're such a dependable young man," or "Sienna deserves the world and you're doing great giving it to her," and while they said it with smiles, there was always a tone underneath it that made me feel like they saw me more as a provider than a partner, but I ignored it because I thought building a future meant accepting certain responsibilities. When wedding planning began, I covered deposits without thinking twice, telling myself it was an investment in the family we were going to build, even if Sienna barely asked about the costs. What I didn't know then was that every choice I made in the name of loyalty was quietly laying the groundwork for a betrayal that would blindside me in ways I never imagined, and even now, thinking back, I can feel the first cracks forming beneath my feet. I've always had a complicated relationship with my extended family, but my cousin Liam was the one person everyone seemed to orbit around, and growing up beside him felt like living in the shadow of a spotlight I never asked for. He's 30, just a year older than me, but he carries himself like someone who's never had to think about consequences, moving through life with this careless charm that people eat up instantly, the kind of guy who fails spectacularly yet still gets applauded for trying, while I've had to earn every inch I ever gained. When Sienna met him at a family dinner, I remember the way she laughed at one of his dumb jokes, her eyes lingering a second too long, though at the time I brushed it off because I wanted to believe she was just being friendly. Later that night, while we were driving home, she said, "Your cousin is interesting," and even though the comment was small, something about the tone made my stomach tighten as if a warning was trying to whisper its way through my chest. Over the next few weeks, every gathering seemed to revolve around Liam's presence, and somehow he and Sienna kept drifting toward each other, inside jokes, shared glances, little conversations that seemed harmless on the surface but carried an undercurrent I didn't want to acknowledge. I'd tell myself, "He's like a brother to me," she wouldn't cross that line, but part of me hated how naturally she smiled around him, how her posture softened in ways she never did with anyone else. My mom would nudge me, saying, "Isn't it great they get along?" while I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes because something inside me felt off, as if I was watching a door slowly opening to a room I wasn't allowed to enter. Even then, I didn't know the truth, how their growing closeness was less coincidence and more gravity, pulling them together while I stood on the sidelines pretending not to notice the shift that would eventually break everything I believed in. Wedding planning has a way of exposing the truth inside people, and for me, it felt like every new decision peeled back a layer of something I didn't want to see. I remember sitting at our dining table surrounded by brochures and color palettes, trying to finalize the venue while Sienna scrolled through her phone with this bored detachment that made me feel like I was planning the wedding alone. When I asked, "Do you like this hall? It fits our budget," she didn't even look up, she just sighed and said, "You're always thinking about money," as if being responsible was an insult rather than the reason we could even afford half the things she wanted. I tried brushing it off, telling myself she was stressed, but the tension grew heavier when Liam started inserting himself into the planning, offering creative opinions that somehow made her light up in ways my suggestions never did. He'd lean over the table and say things like, "No, Sienna deserves something classy, not practical," and she would laugh like he'd said something charming while I sat there feeling like an outsider at my own wedding. The worst part was the subtle shift I saw in her, how she'd turn to him before me, how she'd say, "Liam gets it," as if I was the one disrupting their shared vision instead of the person paying for it. My parents tried reassuring me by saying, "It's just nerves, everyone gets overwhelmed," but they didn't see the way Sienna's eyes drifted toward him even when she pretended not to. Each day, I felt the ground beneath us tilting, a quiet imbalance that made me question whether I was imagining the closeness between them or if something real was forming right in front of me. Still, I pushed forward, convincing myself that once the ceremony was behind us, everything would fall into place, even though deep down, something already felt dangerously out of alignment, like a crack spreading silently through the foundation I had built with everything I had. There's a moment that still replays in my mind like a scene I should have walked out of, but instead, I stood there pretending I didn't understand what I saw. It happened during a family barbecue at my parents' house, the kind of warm afternoon where the smell of grilled chicken and charcoal settles into the air, and everyone is scattered across the backyard laughing and drinking. I went inside to grab more ice from the kitchen, and as soon as I stepped through the doorway, I heard hushed voices, Sienna's soft laugh mixed with Liam's low, excited whispering, a tone far too intimate for two people who were supposedly just cousins-in-law to be. When they noticed me, they jumped apart just slightly, their bodies stiffening like they'd been caught with secrets halfway off their tongues. Sienna smiled too quickly and said, "We were just talking about something for the wedding," while Liam added, "Yeah, man, it's a surprise," but their voices carried this strange tension that didn't match their words. I remember my hands tightening around the ice bag, this dull throb of unease pulsing through me as if my own instincts were tugging at my sleeves, begging me to open my eyes. I tried to brush it off. I told myself, "You're overthinking," because I didn't want to be the jealous fiancé, the insecure guy who jumps at shadows. And when Sienna later leaned into me and said, "Don't act weird, it really is just a surprise," I wanted so badly to believe her that I let her words smother the doubt clawing at my chest. But as the night went on, I found myself replaying that moment, the way Liam looked at her, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when he spoke, the way their voices dropped to whispers the second I stepped out of view. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first moment where the truth began slipping through the cracks, waiting for the day it would tear everything open. It started slowly, like a draft slipping through a cracked window, subtle enough to ignore at first, but cold enough to make me uncomfortable once I finally felt it. Sienna began pulling away in ways that didn't look dramatic on the surface but felt painfully deliberate to me. She stopped touching me absent-mindedly, stopped asking about my day, stopped sitting beside me on the couch unless I explicitly asked. When I'd gently say, "You've been distant lately," she'd roll her eyes and mutter, "You're overreacting," before grabbing her keys and leaving for errands. She refused to explain, the door closing behind her like a final punctuation mark on a sentence I didn't want to read. I'd hear her phone buzzing late at night, once, twice, again, until she'd turn it over quickly, screen face down, saying, "It's just wedding stuff, don't start." She began spending more time texting, her expression shifting between worry and excitement, and every time I asked who she was talking to, she snapped with a sharp, "Stop being paranoid." But what bothered me most wasn't the secrecy, it was the contrast. She came alive when Liam was around, laughing too easily, smoothing her hair when she saw him approaching, her entire demeanor softening like she had no walls with him, while with me she felt closed off, arms crossed, eyes distant, voice clipped. I tried to explain it to myself. She's stressed. Weddings are emotional. She's overwhelmed. But the truth was quieter and sharper, she wasn't overwhelmed, she was uninterested. There was a night when we sat in the living room, the only light coming from a lamp behind her, shadows stretching across her face, and she barely looked at me. I asked if she still wanted to marry me, and she stared at her phone before saying, "Can we not do this right now?" I felt something in me fracture, not break, not yet, but loosen, like the support beam of a home shifting just enough to warn you the structure isn't as stable as you thought. And I had no idea that the distance I was sensing wasn't emotional drift at all, it was the echo of a secret already unfolding in front of me. There are moments in life that hit you so hard your body reacts before your mind even understands, and for me, that moment came on a quiet Sunday morning when nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Sienna had overslept, her hair spilling across the pillow while the shower steamed up our bathroom, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand with this sharp, insistent vibration that pierced the silence. I reached over to silence it, nothing more, just muscle memory, and as soon as my thumb brushed the screen, a message banner slid across the top with words that froze the air in my lungs. Last night was insane. I can't stop thinking about you. Liam. My fingers went numb instantly. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, like I'd stepped underwater without meaning to. I whispered to myself, no, no, that can't be right, as if saying it out loud could rearrange the letters on the screen, could undo the reality forming like a storm behind my ribs. In that moment, every strange look, every whispered conversation, every late-night text made a sickening kind of sense, a puzzle snapping together in a way I never wanted to understand. I should have stormed into the bathroom. I should have screamed, demanded answers, thrown the phone at the wall, but instead, I stood there trembling, heart pounding, because something inside me insisted I needed the truth, not just a single message. My hands were shaking as I opened the phone, each swipe revealing more than the last. Weeks of texts, photos, little jokes, hotel bookings under Liam's name, messages like, I wish he wasn't home, and, you make me feel alive. I felt my knees weaken as if the floor had dropped out from under me, and I had to sit down before I collapsed. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore, it had a timestamp, a voice, a pattern, a timeline. And as the shower continued running behind the closed door, I stared at the evidence in my hands, realizing that everything I believed about my relationship had just shattered in a single, brutal, unforgiving moment. Shock does something strange to your body, it slows everything down while your mind races ahead, creating this awful split where you're moving in slow motion but thinking 3 steps at once. After I found the messages, I didn't confront Sienna right away. Instead, I sat there in the dim light of our bedroom, phone in my hand, heart pounding so violently I could hear it echoing in my ears. When she finally stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, humming casually, I forced my face into something neutral and said, "Morning," like I hadn't just watched my life collapse 2 inches from my fingertips. Over the next few days, I played a role so convincingly it scared me. I laughed when I needed to, slept beside her like nothing was wrong, even kissed her on the forehead once just to see if she could sense the truth burning behind my eyes. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything, screenshots, dates, receipts, even the wedding invoices she never bothered to look at. I'd sit in my car after work, hands trembling as I saved the files to a hidden folder, whispering to myself, just hold on. Not yet. I watched them carefully. The stolen glances. The too quick smiles. The text notifications she'd flipped face down on the table. Once, while washing dishes, I heard her phone buzz and her voice drop to a whisper, "I miss you too." My grip tightened around the sponge until water dripped down my wrist, but I just kept washing, acting like I hadn't heard a word. My parents noticed the exhaustion in my face and kept asking, "Are you okay?" But I wasn't ready to tell anyone. This wasn't the kind of betrayal you exposed with shouting and chaos, this was the kind of betrayal you dismantled quietly, piece by piece, until the truth crushed itself under the weight of its own consequences. I knew that confronting them too early would only give them room to twist the narrative, to paint me as paranoid or insecure. So I stayed silent. Carefully, deliberately, painfully silent, because silence was the only weapon I had left that they couldn't see coming. Rock bottom doesn't always come with screaming or fighting, sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as an ordinary moment that turns your entire world inside out. For me, it happened on a Tuesday evening when Sienna thought I wasn't home yet. I'd come back early from work because I couldn't focus, my mind running on fumes from pretending everything was normal. I paused in the hallway when I heard her voice in the living room, light and carefree, the tone she reserved for people she actually wanted to talk to. She laughed softly and said, "He's stable, that's the point. Liam, he pays for everything. The wedding, the house stuff, he's practically my safety net." Hearing my name like that, flattened into a financial utility, felt like someone dragging a blade across my chest. Then she added, "You're the fun one. He's the reliable one. I just need him until things settle." My stomach twisted so violently I had to lean against the wall, gripping the molding just to stay upright. It wasn't just cheating anymore. It wasn't just betrayal. I wasn't even a person to her, I was an option, a backup plan, a wallet with a pulse. I stayed frozen in the hallway as she kept talking, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Once the wedding's over, we'll figure out the rest. Just, let me secure everything first. That sentence broke something in me. Not cracked. Not fractured. Completely shattered. Any hope, any lingering belief that this situation was fixable, died right there in the shadow of my own home. I backed away quietly, stepping outside before she ever knew I'd heard her, the cold air hitting my face like the world's cruelest wake-up call. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my car door, the betrayal pulsing through me in this nauseating rhythm that made it hard to breathe. That was the moment I hit rock bottom, standing alone in my driveway, realizing I had built my future around someone who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. And I knew then that whatever came next wouldn't be about saving the relationship. It would be about saving myself. After that night, something inside me went still, so still it scared me. Not angry. Not devastated. Just, done. It felt like the moment a flame burns out completely, leaving only cold ash behind. For the first time since everything began falling apart, my thoughts were clear enough to form a single, steady decision: I needed to leave, and I needed to do it without giving her a single warning. Quietly. Cleanly. Without the screaming match she would twist into a pity narrative. She had taken enough from me already, I wasn't giving her a dramatic scene to hide behind. So the next morning, before she woke up, I packed the essentials: documents, charger, work laptop, clothes, moving through the apartment like a ghost. The early sunlight spilled across the living room, catching the stack of unpaid wedding invoices I had covered alone, and it made my chest tighten with bitter clarity. She was using me right up until the moment she could discard me. I folded one last shirt, zipped the suitcase, and took a slow breath. When I left, I didn't slam the door. I didn't even close it loudly. I left a simple note on the counter: 4 words, I need some space. It wasn't for her. It was for me. A buffer. A delay. A chance to set every piece of my life back into my hands before she even realized I'd slipped out of hers. Once I got to my car, I started making calls. The venue. The caterer. The florist. Every service tied to my name. I'd like to cancel, I said to each one, my voice calm in a way that didn't match the tremor beneath my ribs. Refunds were processed back to my account. Contracts dissolved. Money she thought she had secured evaporated in real time. Then I froze the joint savings, removed myself from shared bills, changed passwords, redirected mail. Every tether between us tightened, and then snapped. By the time Sienna finally realized I was gone, the wedding she'd been using me to build was already collapsing quietly beneath her feet. And she had no idea how much was about to fall next. Sienna showed up at my temporary apartment 2 days later, pounding on the door like she was trying to break it down, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and panic. "Open the door. You can't just disappear," she shouted, and when I finally unlocked it, she stormed inside, her eyes wild, mascara smudged, hair a mess like she hadn't slept. "You abandoned me during wedding week? Are you insane?" she snapped, pacing my living room like she owned the air. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match her panic. I just said, "Sit down." Something in my tone must have cut through her frenzy because she froze. When I placed my phone on the table and slid it toward her, screen already open to her messages with Liam, her entire face drained of color. She stared at the screen like the words were physically burning her, whispering, "No, no, it's not what it looks like," even though every line of text was undeniable. Before she could spin some excuse, Liam showed up too, of course he did, rushing inside without knocking while saying, "Bro, we need to talk," until he saw what was on the screen. His mouth snapped shut. His face flushed red, then pale, then something between guilt and panic. "It wasn't serious," he said weakly. "We were just confused." The stupidity of that excuse made my jaw tighten so hard it ached. My parents, who had followed Liam there after hearing him yell in the hallway, walked in next, right as Sienna burst into tears, screaming, "He's twisting everything. It wasn't supposed to be like this." My father looked at her, then at Liam, and said quietly, "You two humiliated him. And you expect sympathy?" Sienna's parents joined later, and the shame on their faces said everything. They knew exactly what she had done. The room erupted into arguments, blame, disgust, voices overlapping like a storm breaking loose. But I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just stood there, watching the two people who betrayed me scramble to rewrite the disaster they created. Knowing they hadn't even begun to face the consequences. The days after the confrontation felt strangely quiet, like the world had finally stopped spinning long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat again. I blocked Sienna on everything, phone, email, social media, because every time her name flashed across my screen, I felt that same cold wave of humiliation crash over me, and I refused to drown in it anymore. She tried reaching me through mutual friends, leaving voicemails from unknown numbers, crying, begging, promising things that sounded more like desperation than remorse. "Please, just meet me," she sobbed in one message, "we can fix this." I deleted it before she finished speaking. Liam didn't fare any better. My family, who had always adored him, turned their backs almost overnight. My mother told me later, "I can't even look at him without feeling disgusted," and my father, who rarely raises his voice, told Liam, "You destroyed the one person who always defended you." Liam moved out of his parents' house after the arguments escalated, but running didn't save him. Word spreads fast in families, and even faster in our town. His reputation crumbled. He lost a job offer he'd been bragging about for months because he showed up late 3 times in a row, distracted and spiraling. As for Sienna, the fallout was worse. Her parents cut off support, ashamed of the scandal she caused, ashamed that she treated the person who funded her entire wedding like an expendable resource. She moved back into her childhood bedroom after the landlord refused to renew her lease. Apparently, she'd been behind on payments for months because she assumed I'd cover everything eventually. People whispered about her everywhere she went. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations dried up. She and Liam tried being together for a week, maybe 2, but guilt, pressure, and public judgment broke them faster than anything I could have done. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life, quietly, steadily, deliberately. But even then, something in me sensed the story wasn't fully over yet. There was still one final decision I needed to make. One that would close this chapter for good. In the weeks that followed, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: silence, not the painful kind that echoes betrayal, but the kind that lets you breathe again, the kind that fills the empty spaces with peace instead of fear. I remember waking up in my new apartment one morning, sunlight cutting through the blinds, and realizing I didn't feel the weight of someone else's expectations on my chest anymore. No buzzing phone to hide. No tense conversations to navigate. No pretending. Just me, my thoughts, and a life that finally belonged to me again. I started therapy, something I'd put off for years, and for the first time, I heard my own voice speak the truth without swallowing it down. My therapist asked me, "When did you stop choosing yourself?" and that question haunted me in the best possible way. I went back to the gym. I cooked real meals instead of takeout. I reconnected with friends I'd pushed aside during the engagement because I was too busy carrying a relationship that wasn't carrying me back. Each small step felt like stitching myself back together, thread by thread. Months later, through mutual circles, I heard what became of them. Liam moved to another city after the social fallout made it impossible for him to stay. Even his closest friends treated him like a walking cautionary tale. As for Sienna, she struggled financially, like a balloon popping in slow motion. Without my stability, the lifestyle she curated collapsed. Jobs didn't last. Relationships didn't stick. Every decision she'd built on the idea of security had vanished with me the moment I walked away. Some people told me I should have confronted them publicly or exposed them online. But the truth is, watching their lives unravel without lifting a finger was its own form of justice, quiet, dignified, unshakable. And eventually, I met someone new. Someone genuine. Someone who didn't see me as a safety net but as a partner. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was steady and honest, everything I'd once begged for in silence. Looking back now, I've realized something I wish I understood sooner. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply choosing a life where their betrayal no longer defines you.